Welcome to the Canna Conversations blogcast, part video blog, part podcast, aimed to bridge the gap between the cannabis industry and the patients it serves. Join the ladies of Midwest Canna Concierge as they bring everyone to the table, from cultivation experts and dispensary staff to lawyers, doctors, and medical marijuana patients, to have open conversations around all things cannabis related.
Hello, everybody. We are here today with Michael Komorn for Komorn Law. Oh my gosh, said that so fast. Komorn Law.
Come on.
Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to join you guys.
Yeah, we're happy.
And
to
I'm
have you.
Amanda, and this is Danielle.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess I took for granted that we're on here all the time.
Short-term memory loss these folks are dealing with. We
It's
gotta
been a
keep
week,
on
man.
reminding them.
That's true. Good point. Michael, I'm hoping that you could kind of give us a little bit of a backstory. I don't want to dive too much into your backstory because we have so many good topics that we can touch on, but kind of what brought you to cannabis law and what got you going in this realm of the legal world.
Good question. I started out as opening my own practice, and I was doing all kinds of different law when I first started: criminal defense, bankruptcy, divorce, things like that. Kind of merged into just exclusively criminal defense and did that for probably 10, 12, 15 years. And then Michigan, legalized medical marijuana. But leading up to that point, the people that I was representing in the criminal justice system, which is broken, by the way, in a cycle of a cesspool of just not fixing and just damage to individuals, communities, et cetera. One of the principles that I identified, and there's the illegality of marijuana. There's no question about much of that brings people into the system is associated with the traffic stops, the illegality of marijuana, the smell, the probable cause to search, the raids in the houses and all that. So I knew in the back of my mind that's always been a source and a tool of law enforcement to initiate law enforcement encounters. But I also knew at the same time that cannabis was medicine. I knew about this before the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act was enacted. I knew from individuals that I've been interacting with of how it had benefited them. And while we weren't quite at the quote unquote opioid epidemic, it was certainly something that could be used at a minimum to treat chronic and severe pain. So after the law passed, very interested in it. It's a new law. It's in the area that's associated with what was illegal, and there was not a lot of guidance. Michigan, interestingly, had not really had a platform for medical marijuana. If you look at the history of it, we had Michigan NORML, the national legalization organization, and chapters in Michigan that were advocating for the legalization of marijuana. So when the MPP, the organization that goes to various states and assists in the ballot initiatives to get these things passed, after they got that accomplished and then left, there was like a vacuum or a void of information. There was no place to really go. You just had legalization, nothing else. And it was an interesting dilemma because there's 7 million people in the state of Michigan, and this new law passed, and there's virtually no direction where to go, who to talk to, where to get information, and I threw myself into that immediately. And I was fascinated by it for those reasons that I mentioned and several others. And started volunteering at certification centers where doctors were meeting with patients, and I would do free consultations after, meet with patients and try to provide them some guidance on where to go, what to do, and what the laws were. And I remember always having this, kind of a running joke. I'd be like, there was like the first giggle, like it's legal now, you can engage with cannabis. And their questions were, what do I do? Where do I go? And I'd say, do you have a caregiver? And they'd say, what's a caregiver? So we were just at the very beginning of this. I also got involved with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Organization, which was very helpful in the sense that it was Greg Francisco, Brad Forrester were two of the people that started it. And they stepped in and created this platform where all the information could be found, discussed. This is in the days when websites and forums were popular. And got involved with that group and that organization. It just kind of grew from there. I ended up representing a lot of patients and caregivers that got arrested. driving cases, had some significant cases, and just the tenor of the entire view of it from the law enforcement side was they were going to treat this as a public safety issue, not a public health issue. And as this thing's progressed, it became obvious to me that they were not trained, there was no education they were given, and they were operating under, the illegality of marijuana. And it created some really problematic, evil, terrible cases that they initiated, but they were all defendable and beatable. So for 10, 12 years, I was inundated with cases. There was raids taking place, forfeitures, and I hunkered down and we defended and called witnesses and made our cases and had a lot of successes and got a lot of great stories from all of that. And, was in some serious battles against the government and experiences that I shared with my clients, patients, and caregivers that I'll never forget. And the type of stories people define as like trench buddies. You're in a battle together. You don't forget those events.
Sure.
And you experience things that will last a lifetime. You know what I mean?
I bet.
That's kind of the background. And I know I could go on, but I know we want to.
That's okay. I was going to say,
some other stuff.
well, because you said it opened you up to a slew of cases and different things. So I kind of want to pick a couple of different things that I wanted to talk about. One of them is the driving under the influence and how that's navigated. But I first want to touch about if you see, because I get this from patients a lot, parents that are going through custody battles that one or the other consumes, whether they have a card or don't have a card. I have had a lot of patients that are getting a card hoping that would protect them in the custody case, but where their custody of their children is being threatened because of their cannabis use. Do you have any experience kind of navigating that issue?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
I do. Well, there's two things there. One is the issues with CPS and what impact Child Protective Services may, what actions they may initiate and how that impacts that relationship. And then there's also custody battles. Those are two totally different things. The custody battles, to start with that, are, private disputes between individuals that are getting divorced and fighting over their kids usually. And, divorce is ugly. If you get in a situation, people are fighting over their kids, things are out of order from the beginning. Like the idea of a divorce is not to mess with the kids and find the best place for them and who's going to be best. But divorce is divorce, and people are getting divorced because they can't get along. Shouldn't affect the kids, but it does. So in those situations, you have people exasperating, saying things, talking about things, calling the other one out all the time, independent of whether it actually impacts the child, negatively. So in that regard, I've been called many, many times by lawyers involved with divorces to consult with and participate in those kind of allegations. There's no question that, rising out of 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, these allegations would impact the outcome of those cases, just like the view of the courts regarding medical marijuana in general, just for the use or the cultivation for medical use. Disdain from the courts for those people, real battle. The courts didn't like the law. And likewise, when you get into the family court, same thing. It was having a very negative impact, even though the law had passed and gave immunities and defenses to those that were participating. And, the first criticisms were always that the people did not really need it. Like it's only for people that are dying, and not treating some other ailment or serious debilitating condition, but limited situations, and that anyone can get a card. So there's always that suggestion that it's really not needed, and trying to force it into not a medical use, but more of a controlled substance problem. This is always the battle that's taking place. As far as CPS goes, likewise, Michigan's history is ugly regarding this. There's been many terrible stories of children that were taken, placed into the state's custody. The parents, were behind the 8 ball from the get-go and didn't know what to do or how to navigate, and they were fighting an uphill battle about allegations of cannabis being a controlled substance issue. Now, the law in Michigan would not allow that. The law in Michigan is very clear that you are protected from any penalty, which would include the taking of your children, if you are a medical marijuana patient and in compliance. And also, this is also important, Michigan law has recognized the concept that just because someone drinks alcohol, because someone smokes marijuana, whether it's medical or recreational, on its face does not equate to a controlled, or it does not equate to something that puts the child at risk. This is what you call anticipatory neglect. Like, oh, because you're doing that, we anticipate, because of that behavior, that sometime in the future you're going to be neglectful. And because we can predict the future of your activities, even though it hasn't happened yet, we're going to take the child on those bases. Now, Michigan rejects this as a legal principle. This is not the jurisprudence of Michigan, but you still have judges that do this all the time. I had a recent case that got some news attention. A woman from Michigan went to Alabama, got arrested. I mean, it was in a parking lot. Police came. They had medical marijuana. They took the kid 4 or 5 months there. They got the child back to Michigan, and I appeared in front of the judge, and she was taking issue with the husband, who was a medical marijuana patient, stating to him on the record that her experience in the studies she reads, all parents that use marijuana, whether medical or legal, are bad parents. And I said to her, what studies are you talking about, Judge? Because I'd like to know. Couldn't name one. And no one's ever said that to her, because she sat on the bench and said those things, and no one's ever challenged her. She ought to remember what they were, blah, blah, and just some lip, but if it's known by the parents, or the word gets out, or the CPS workers that are dealing with the next investigation, they know that this judge is going to give them a hard time. They're going to follow the lead and make recommendations to have the children removed for their cannabis use. But, the law is the law, and it needs to be utilized. And there's both a lack of information from the people that are rejecting it and taking children, and also from the lawyer side. Not all of them have been embracing it and utilizing it for the protections that it affords. So that's it's unfortunate. There's still cases going on, and it really revolves back to the issue, which is that in Michigan, cannabis still remains a Schedule I drug. The scheduling of it as a Schedule I drug means, by definition, that it's addictive and it has no medicinal purposes. But Michigan passed a law that says Michigan declares that cannabis is medicine. So these two things can't live in the same world. In fact, Michigan recognized a few years after the law was passed that if it's medical marijuana, it's Schedule II. If it's not, it's Schedule I. Now, it can't be Schedule I and Schedule II. Schedule I is there's no medical value. Schedule II says, there's medical value, but, it could be addictive or whatnot. So it makes no sense. Furthermore, we still, 2018, Michigan legalized marijuana, which means the state is selling it, getting taxes. The idea that they are selling and taxing and creating revenue for the state of Michigan, $3 billion was the last announcement, with a Schedule I drug that's dangerous, addictive, and has no medical value is insane, right? It doesn't make any sense. In fact, I had a case Tuesday where I had someone from the head of the toxicology department on the stand, and I asked him, is marijuana Schedule I? He said, let me think about that. No, it can't be, can it? State's selling it, they're getting taxes. I said, that's the best answer you've given all day. Who says we don't agree on anything? It's a contentious hearing, but that's where it is. Like, it doesn't make any sense logically, but yet it remains that way. This impacts things like employment. Like, if you're testing positive for cannabis, Schedule I, they can get rid of you. If it's not a Schedule I, it's like alcohol, right? So they're not going to fire you if you have alcohol. They're not in your system as opposed to being drunk at work. But for that purposes, you've got, the smell still issue and
Michael,
CPS.
what is the situation with Michigan folks and probation? with their card. We get a ton of people that are either on probation or about to be on probation that still want to use their medical marijuana or don't want to have to be forced into opiates and whatnots. So what is the guideline, and can you tell us a little bit about that particular situation?
Sure. The answer to that question is the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act provides immunity from arrest, prosecution, or penalty of any kind. That was the laws that came out originally in 2008, 2009, and it remains part of the statute. There's been amendments to it, but that has not changed. So it would follow that if you're a medical marijuana patient and you're on probation, the basic premise of the Medical Marijuana Act is the medical use of marijuana. So the use, having it within your system, goes without saying. If you're a patient, putting aside how much you have at home or how many plants you're growing, the medical use of it, having in your system, is permitted by virtue of the card. And judges, again, just as I said, the view of it as being a controlled substance has been the perception. And the judges have always been of the opinion probation is a honor or a gift. You know, don't beggars can't be choosers. If I put you on probation, I could put you in jail, and you're going to do it by my terms. And you have no, if you want to smoke cannabis, if your client wants to smoke cannabis, we're going to take his or her license, or we're going to send you to jail or something like that. But in 2021, I believe, we took a case out of, Grand Traverse, an individual by the name of Michael Toohey, who was on probation and on a case there, and the judges just, there was a policy in the jurisdiction that they would never let anyone use medical cannabis on probation. Just no reason, just flat out ban. And we challenged it. We argued at the district court, circuit court. We had to appeal. They were denied it. And we got up to the Court of Appeals and got a phenomenal ruling where the Court of Appeals finally recognized this immunity or protection from any penalty. And they said any penalty would include being on probation, being in compliance with probation, and then having the court penalize you for your medical use. Can't happen. The law that the court relied upon is if you're a medical marijuana patient, can't suffer arrest, prosecution, or penalty of any kind. The penalty of any kind was the key term that they utilized to find in our favor and decree that patients with a card cannot be penalized if they're on probation for their medical use. Now, these words that I'm saying in the law have been there since 2009. Just took until 2021 until the court finally identified it and wrote about it. But the carnage between 2009 and 2021, thousands of people were denied or penalized for their medical use. I just saw there was some legislation that was introduced that they're trying to change this, still talking about it. And they're trying to change, there's a bill that was introduced where for drug court, which is one of these specialized courts, they've got, veterans court, drug court, family court. And the theory is that it's a consensual, you have to consent to go into the program. And then if you're consenting to go into the program, you have to do it by their terms, and they can prevent you then from using medical marijuana. So bill hasn't passed yet, but it's out there, and it just represents that, the courts are still antagonistic to this. And there's obviously
I don't
some
understand
desire.
why it has to be so black and white. Like, why is it written in, why in that drug court situation or program or whatever, can't it be on a case-by-case basis? Like, what if somebody is a recovering addict, they're using cannabis as a way to cope with their addiction, and yet you want them to not use that, but instead use a different, I'm assuming they then want them to do like a Suboxone clinic or a Meloxicam clinic or whatever, and instead that's a more accepted route versus the plant. Like, I don't understand why the law has to be so
Well,
cut or
a
dry,
better question is, why are judges playing doctor? What do they know? You know, they've been
Exactly.
locking people up for marijuana for years, most of them. They're not in a position to make these decisions. Another scenario that I'm reminded of is Veterans Court. Another thing that came up, like all of a sudden there's a lot of attention given to veterans the last 5 years, trying to, if, you know, they get into the court system, it may be because of, you know, issues related to their service. And instead of throwing them to the wolves in the criminal justice, they created this Veterans Court, which is partially federal funded. Now, it's interesting because even though cannabis is illegal on the federal level, the VA hospital took a position that they weren't going to object to patients, veterans who use medical cannabis, so long as they continue to treat with the VA. They'll assist in getting them the records that are needed to get certified and get their card. And at the same time, the federal government made some announcements that said, you know, that honored these policies, in particular for Veterans Court, even though the federal government finds marijuana to be illegal, if they have a card or a recommendation that they can use it while they're in VA court. So they, you know, that's a totally conflicted policy that they have. Now, I had a situation in a state court where the judge still wouldn't allow it. You know, they wanted this veteran to take, you know, he moved from Florida to Michigan just so he could use medical marijuana, and he still wanted to deny it. And, you know, said, counsel, we don't let people drink alcohol when they're in Veterans Court. I mean, that's the view of it. It's a tragedy. It's
Still not looked at as a medicine.
and I looked as a medicine.
I have a question about judges. Are they required to do like any type of continuing education, or like, do they just like get on the stand and then they just don't, they're so stuck in their ways, they don't necessarily like keep up with like current society practices, laws? I don't know. I just feel like when a lot of these judges get so stuck in their ways that they're not even open to the new science that's coming out and everything that we're learning and all the proof that's out there now of what this plant actually does, but they're still hesitant to accept it.
We have to understand what we're talking about. We're talking about judges. The perception that one in the public may have is that they are honorable, that they're just, that they seek the right decisions, they make the tough calls because that's what they're hired to do. This is the farthest thing from the truth, okay? Unfortunately, Michigan's judicial system is a elected position. So it is a popularity contest. It's not, you're not removed from popularity. You make a bad decision, you make a decision that's not popular, it may affect your ability to get reelected. You make a decision that's favorable to a defendant, the police are pissed off, the prosecutor's pissed off, word gets out, bad judge, they're not in our favor, they'll get a candidate to run against them. So that is inherently a problem that they are not removed from so they can make independent decisions. Furthermore, one of the ways to get elected is to be quote unquote tough on crime. Tough on crime means addressing people that have, you know, that they call them out as controlled substance programs and punish them for it. I remember there's a prosecutor that ran for judge for an open seat and a defense attorney that ran for an open seat. The prosecutor's campaign talk was that I put people away in my job every day, the bad guys. My opponent, the defense attorney, tries to get them off, you know, get them. This is the problem, that the criminal justice system needs both of those people to make a fair outcome. Like the prosecutor shouldn't be proud of a conviction unless there's been a good fight and they have a lawyer, like they have a right to counsel, right to competent counsel, right to cross-examine, and all those things should take place before they're going to get a conviction. So it makes no sense. But the idea that tough on crime, and another way is to be, if they're not going to be tough on crime, you're real into like treatment programs, you know, and we're going to fix everything. And taking on this maternal or paternal view of the community that you've now gotten into the system, we're going to fix you. We have all these resources here that we're going to use because they claim that they know what to do. Now, I can understand that because as a criminal defense lawyer, you see people come into the system, out of the system, back, and nothing changes. So if you're a judge, you're going to want to, you know, either moving paper and people, but to try to have an impact, but there's very little in their quiver or in the resources that actually have an impact. Most of the things that find people in court are mental health issues, you know, economic struggle, lack of education, and family issues, none of that is in the bailiwick of the resources they're talking about. It's all, and much of it is driven by finances. The money that's generated from bringing someone into the system, getting them into the probation, is raising revenue. And that is also the problem. Why are judges this way? Do they get educated, whatnot? Judges aren't looking to get educated. When they may start that way. Once they get the robe on, it's called black robe disease. They realize that their role in the system is that they got people coming in, lots of files, lots of busyness, new cases all the time, and they got to move them along. So they're not interested in anything other than that. The system is built as firm and structured so that before you even get in there, they got a place to put you, and
it's a funnel.
It's a funnel. And I call it, it's like the herd, it's like the herd jumps into the river and tries to get across the other side and just eaten by alligators. Like that's what's going on. And people jump in one after the other and they get in there and, they get stuck in the river, so to speak. But it's
very true. And it's hard to get out once you're in.
It's hard to get out. And you know what?
How do you break it though?
Well, I'll say this.
Or change it.
These things that I'm saying right now about this broken system, the judges and the way that they handle things, it may sound like I'm a bitter lawyer after 30 years and just ranting and, but recently the state of Michigan came out with this trial court funding report. Their own researchers, their own chosen people, judges, professors, police, and they concluded that the Michigan court system is broken. It's not me saying this. I mean, I've been saying it, but now this report supports what I'm saying. Broken because the district court, where all of it begins, the warrants are signed there, the preliminary exams start there, the bindovers to court, all the misdemeanors, those courts rely on the litigants that come before them to pay their budget to run the court. So it creates if not an absolute bias of unfairness, the appearance of bias is unequivocal, because if you are standing before a judge with your lawyer asking this judge to throw your case or recognize an exemption or protection, they have a vested interest in ruling against you, because the dollars in the pocket of the defendant, they need to pay their light bill and to pay their secretaries. You see what I'm saying? So it is upside down and backwards. We've gotten too big of a government that can't manage itself.
I was gonna say, I don't think it just is Michigan though. I think it starts higher up. I think it's bigger than Michigan that's broken.
Well, I think what happens is you have, the economy when it's off and there's not a tax base to fund the local governments, they have to look to other methods of doing that. And their way that they do that is they invest in the law enforcement. I mean, if you look at Michigan, all of the biggest buildings, most cities, the biggest buildings throughout the state are the courts. Like if the city's going to redo something, they redo the court. So it's closer, it's attached to the jail. They can bring people in, bring them out, get them in there. They have multiple windows,
Beautiful marble columns and just carved mahogany wood.
It's like an investment in the city to get more money, and it's all upside down and backwards. I think our priorities are in the wrong place, but
100%.
That's the system.
Let's transition to banking. What
Okay.
do you think about the federal banking or even just state banking for cannabis businesses? We have people that are in ancillary businesses that are having a challenge with obtaining banking for merchant solutions and such. So what do you see with the banking industry in cannabis?
Good question. This has been an ongoing problem. The federal government, which ensures the federal banking, is not allowing cannabis business activity. So in the cannabis commercial world, traditional banking, traditional loaning, and all of the way that most business is done is removed. And this could arguably be good, because if there was traditional banking and there was traditional resources to invest in and stock market selling and shares, publicly traded, you'd have a completely different set of players that are involved in the industry. You know what I mean? Like there would be Wall Street investors that would be putting money into the businesses, would be, national companies, like we anticipate will happen if and when the federal government legalizes marijuana. So I mean, the banking system will change one day when the federal legalization happens. In the meantime, as we stand here now, it's not bad to a certain degree because it allows opportunity for people that may not be able to compete with the traditional lenders and the traditional borrowers who have more resources to borrow and more resources to participate. The lack of that creates opportunity for all those other people that are going to be able to, get a loan from some non-traditional source and participate, or bring some money from a family member to the table. As the industry grows, there's always a need for capital. Michigan has had some banks, a lot of credit unions have begun to open and bank with marijuana businesses that have licenses. And the concern is mostly about resources, capital that is earned from the selling of marijuana. That's their concern. You may get an investment, someone lends you some money, they may take collateral in the property of where the activity is going to take place. That's not going to be an issue in terms of depositing that in a, Bank of America or Chase Bank. That's not going to be a problem. The problem becomes when on the retail side, any of the sides where the sale of marijuana is creating revenue and those deposits. Because of that, because there's limited banking, they have all of the power, and the accounts that are set up for these cannabis businesses are charging an arm and a leg, way beyond what you would normally expect, but they hold the cards. And if you want to do some banking and have bank accounts, do online, bill paying, et cetera, you've got to capitulate to their demands, which is usually a high monthly fee, every month, and then some other transactional costs that are above the normal. So that's the situation where it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because traditional banking, when it gets there, will be better for those operators, but I don't know if you'll see the same opportunity to get into the market, because it's going to be much more filled up with other, businesses that have a lot of capital.
Yeah, we used to have a banking solution that was a third party, and they charged an arm and a leg. But what ends up happening with all these restrictions is places that don't even touch the plant are restricted from participating in, not even in the loan capacity, but more just like merchant solutions or even just banking, period. But
my suggestion is this: if you're gonna set up, one of the ancillary types of business, not handling marijuana, don't name your business a marijuana business. Don't have marijuana, cannabis, bud, sticky, any of that stuff in there, because that's going to be the trigger. If they were to follow the lead of, you're taking credit cards and they're going directly deposit into your traditional bank, they shouldn't make an issue of it, because it's not from a cannabis sale, not from the selling of cannabis. And how else would they know? Most of the banking regulations in that regard are driven by the tellers. You bring money into the bank, you cash a check, come up with a bunch of cash to deposit. They are given the authority to make that decision. So, if it's non-cash types of transactions, they would have no real way of knowing, and nor should they, unless you're signaling it, we're a cannabis certification center. We, patients cannabis, but there's no cannabis that's actually being sold. I would never open myself up by declaring that that's the type of business we're doing. It's a doctor's office, right? We're an indoor gardening store. If we're talking about the other non-touching of cannabis types of businesses.
Yeah. I just use PayPal. That's my thing, and try to fly under the radar. But that's just been the case since day one.
Yeah. I have a course that I'm
Unfortunately.
selling that we've talked about it on your show, that teaches people how to use cannabis, how to mindfully medicate. It's called Mindfully Medicating with Cannabis. And I have run into almost every online payment processor has declined working with me, even though I'm selling a course. I'm not even selling plant or any actual product, and they won't let me do it because it has the term. I'm assuming, because they won't say this, but I'm assuming it's because it has the word cannabis in it. So I'm going to have to go back through and probably reword how I write all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say what you're really doing is you're giving
Terrible.
consulting. You're a consultant and educator. You know, you may consult and educate someone on, you know, reading. It may not really be the case. I would not make any disclosures. I mean, a lot of it is just in the name, you know. I mean, even if you're intending to consult with only people interested in cannabis, doesn't exclude you from consulting someone that wants information about something else, right? Or hemp, for example, which would be. But I wouldn't mention it in the name, and I certainly wouldn't, you know, give any other additional information that's not necessary. I know that you gotta, you know, to get your EIN number and usually set up a bank, they want to know what kind of business it is. You know what I mean? But
Oh, well,
you
these
don't have
ones
to-
aren't even through, like, I haven't even had to put in I have my EIN and everything through with my LLC. It's just that when I go to sign up for the banking, it has to be connected to my website. And I think they pull things from the website that is triggering the problem.
Yeah, and they've gotten a little more firm with that, because when I was setting things up for down here, I set up a whole new PayPal account. And because that's what I'd been using for the other one. I don't want to take up too much time with Michael with this, but yes, they restricted it. I still have money in there that they won't let me have for 6 months or whatever it is. And they just completely shut it down, provided a couple of other options, but they want to do site visits and stuff. And I'm just like, you know, I'm not even trying to go that far. I'll just leave it out. But let's
I was gonna say, I
Wait,
do want to touch on the
refocus.
driving under the influence thing before we.
I have to say this though. So I would set up a corporation or LLC as the parent company, and then set up a doing business as, and use that name later on. And the website can be associated with the original company, which is the consulting company. You know what I mean? You gotta, I don't know.
creative.
I mean, yeah, be a little creative. But all right. So to the driving, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that you guys have. A while ago, I remember watching an episode of your show that you talked about what people should say or how they should address an officer in the event that they're pulled over. Whether, I know it'll be two different, it's kind of two different edges if you have a card or if you don't have a card, and kind of how to navigate that. I know that that's kind of a sticky situation. I remember when I was working in the dispensary, I had patients that were genuinely like afraid to even drive, even if they weren't medicated, because they were afraid of being told that they were going to test positive or whatever. So how can patients navigate that?
That's a good question. Let me try to. So first of all, there's general legal advice that goes with this question. The first is that whenever you encounter law enforcement and they are asking you questions about anything, you do not have to answer. Clear as day. You have a right to remain silent, and you have a right to request your own lawyer. So that is the principle that still guides us here. Regarding traffic stops, there are some obligations that somebody has by virtue of having a driver's license. When you get your driver's license, you are consenting to, when you use it, if you're pulled over by the police or they want to pull you over, you have to pull over. You have to give them your driver's license. You have to show that you are lawfully in the vehicle. You have a registration and proof of insurance. That's it. If they ask you where you're going, where you're coming from, you don't have to answer those questions. If they suspect that there is some cannabis, right, and it depends where you are, and you know, Ohio may not have, it's not recreational yet, it's medical, and even backing up to Michigan when it was just medical, when they sensed that there was marijuana in the car for a patient, they undergo an investigation. They wanted to see what you had, where was it. It would sometimes result in getting them out of the car and trying to force them into some tests and whatnot. Now, I can say this unequivocally in Michigan, but there are things that law enforcement will try to use to determine if somebody is impaired or not? First of all, if they sense that there's marijuana and they want to search the car, you do not consent to search the car. You do not have to consent. They will ask you if they can search the car. You have an absolute right to say no, even if they think there might be, but you do not have to give consent. If they determine in their own mind that there's probable cause, they're going to get you out of the car and they're going to look anyways. That's better than you consenting to the search, okay? That's number one. I do not consent to a search of the vehicle. Officer, my lawyer has told me not to discuss anything with an officer. Here's my card, my license and registration. I've given you that. That's my legal obligation. My lawyer's told me not to talk beyond that. Blame him or her, not me. And if you ask me to do some tests, my lawyer's also told me I'm not going to do any of those tests, because what you're really doing is they're getting you out of the car to have you give evidence of how you're impaired. And the tests that they're going to use are things that you should not expect that you're going to pass, because they don't make you pass these tests to get your driver's license. Why do you think you're going to pass them at 11 o'clock at night on the side of a road in February with cars driving by and snow all over the place? Okay, this is not going to happen. Who is the perfect specimen that's passed these tests? You think they're your age and your medical situation? You know, I don't even know if the officer can pass it. And they have nothing to do with impairment for cannabis. They use standardized field sobriety tests, but it's involved with alcohol. And every case I've ever had where they're trying to show that the person failed the field sobriety test and they arrest them for cannabis, I ask the question, do you have any scientific literature, any reports that says those tests, which are the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, the walk and turn 9 paces, turn back, and the stand on one leg, is there any evidence that exists that connects failing those tests and marijuana impairment? They will say no. Why did you arrest them? Because they failed the test and they were impaired. This is the logic that's going on. So, and just to make this point more clear, when the Michigan recreational law was getting it was on the ballot, and there was a lot of campaigning on both sides of the pro and against it. The sheriffs and police officers took the position that don't vote for the legalization of marijuana, because when people are driving, it's very difficult for officers to determine whether or not they're impaired or not. We have a difficult time establishing probable cause, which means they don't have the tools to figure it out. You see what I'm saying? Like that problem is not a problem. They're not impaired. You know what I mean? They pull them over. We can't figure it out. Well, if you can't figure it out by observing them, don't create some witchcraft science stuff and try to parlay that into some truth. It doesn't apply. So the problem that they're after is first of all, it's not substantiated. There's any correlation between driving with cannabis in your system and accidents or danger or public safety. And Michigan also recently, in the last couple of years, came out with a traffic safety report made by the Michigan State Police that said whatever that number is, the amount of THC in your blood at the time you're driving, and if they draw your blood and report it as a certain amount, has nothing to do with whether you're impaired or not. You could be at 20 nanograms of THC and be driving fine. You could have 1 nanogram of THC and be not driving fine. So it's all a facade, and even more than that. This last week I had a driving under the influence case that we're dealing with. As we know, throughout the country, hemp is legal, right? So hemp has trace amounts of THC. What does that do to the THC in your blood? Well, ask the lab that. Can you distinguish that THC that you reported, whether it's 15, 10, 21, 2, 3 of THC? Can you say where it came from? They will say, no, we can't. So you have this paradox, which is that they have THC. It's got to be from an illegal source, and they can't tell you that it's from an illegal source. They have to prove that the substance in your body while you're driving is a controlled one substance. We're back to that now. Can they say that if hemp's legal? Of course not. So, a lot of this a lot of this is the fallout of what we did with alcohol. Like, okay, fine, we're going to let people drink alcohol and go to bars and someplace, drink in a brown paper bag. But once you get on the road, we're going to regulate the shit out of it. We're going to have all these tests to get you, and that's fine. So when the legalization of marijuana happened, they're still looking to do it the same way, but it doesn't correlate. And the attempts that they've used, as they did with alcohol, are just failures. It's just witchcraft and junk science. And anyone that finds themselves in a case that involves the impairment by marijuana or any presence of cannabis in your system, these cases are beatable. And people need to know this, and they shouldn't have fear. And I know nobody wants to go through this, and there's a way to try to avoid that, which I want to talk about in a second. But if anyone gets charged or their loved ones are charged, these cases can be and should be beaten and challenged all day long. Now, nobody wants to go through this, so it's important that people understand that when you drive and you're involved with cannabis, whether it's legal, medical, or not, you don't want anybody to know your business. When you get in a vehicle, you have to be prepared mentally for that traffic stop. You should probably practice saying the things that I'm saying. And the premise is don't talk, don't walk, and don't spit. Don't give them, spit for their saliva test. Follow these rules and you're going to minimize your liability. Another thing to do is understand that they're looking for a reason to identify you with something that they have predetermined is associated with cannabis use. Your Grateful Dead sticker on your bumper sticker, your air freshener hanging from your car, messy car. Get rid of all that stuff. Have your papers close at hand so you can get them when needed. And to the extent possible, don't drive with the cannabis in the car. Put it in the trunk, lock it up if you have to, go from one place to the other.
And know your impairment level. Like, know your impairment level before you get in the car. Don't give them a reason to pull you over in the first place.
Well, they may pull you over for for speeding.
I was going to say, not that they necessarily need a reason, but.
Right, but so you don't want, anyways. But that's it really is not their business. It's not something to share, and not that you have to lie, but you have to understand. People want to be honest with the police. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just a patient. But they need to understand this disconnect in this particular area. You can love the police or hate the police or feel neutral about them, but regarding cannabis and controlled substances, when you interact with a traffic safety officer that's doing traffic patrol, understand that when they get trained for doing these tests, the first day of their 2-day training involves scaring the crap out of them, telling them how much damage and carnage comes from traffic accidents. And the only way that this is going to stop is by them finding that drunk or high person. So they fire them up, give them this, courage badge to go out and save the world. And that's how they go about these investigations. So understand that there's an aggressive, investigative, wanting to get in there, wanting to get into your bloodstream and, ferret you out as a possible risk to somebody else when it doesn't really exist. So people need to be educated about this and be, smart and think it through if they're going to be, everybody should. They should know what their rights are. They should know how to interact with police, but even more so if you're going to be engaging with kids, at least where we are right now.
Yeah. One of the things that I hear is pretty effective is to put like a hemp joint, or what I do is a pack of hemp cigarettes right in my car. So, initially there's just, even if they smell it, because I just anticipate everywhere I go, I'm going to smell like cannabis. It's just part of that's part of my perfume.
That's a really good point, Amanda. And I want to reemphasize what we're talking about here. If they're suspicious of the smell, I want to get in there. You say, oh, no, I don't smoke marijuana. I smoke hemp. Or as I said, if they draw blood and, for some you arrested, they draw blood and they search your car and they find hemp and they put that take a picture of it. It's part of your evidence file and you get that on the defense lawyer and come like, oh, smoking hemp. We know that THC is actually from hemp. That's a good idea and not a bad way to try to play it safe. But
I've got to use what works, Michael.
Got to use what works, exactly.
God, and true. I think that's all the questions that I had, Amanda, unless you had anything else you wanted to touch on before we let him go.
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of stuff that are, that'll be informational for patients and such. Michael, can you think of anything that is happening right now that you think that maybe patients should know about?
Well, I think every day and every week that passes, we're getting more, the country is more acceptable of medical cannabis. And I think on the, compared to legalization, the percentage in favor of it is just exponentially improved over the last 10, 12 years. And we're seeing more and more states, opting in and getting some kind of, decrim or medical law in effect. And I think a lot of this arises out of the opioid epidemic, which is plaguing counties, cities across the country. So I think it's a positive thing for patients moving forward. None of what this conversation should be to discourage people. It is about education. It's about educating others when you are becoming a patient. I think there are resources such as you guys that provide information and how to get involved in and titrate and learn about what your best method of ingestion is and frequency of use and dosing and whatnot. And it's served as a tremendous alternative to the traditional prescription drugs, which have not been, really many in the public's best interest. And one of the things that's been remarkable factually is that, before I got involved with the medical cannabis, I didn't realize how many people in Michigan were chronic and severe pain patients. During the Governor Snyder era, I know every September was pain management month, where they celebrated pain management and try to educate on prescription pills and, opioid issues and whatnot. It was 27% of all households were seeking treatment for acute or chronic pain. That's probably like 2 million people in Michigan. So it made sense that medical marijuana would catch on, because the program with opioid use is that it usually, once you're on it, it continues, you increase the dosing. All these things have ancillary problems with the body. And it's an endless, you're tied to this. Whereas the alternative choice that I've seen many, many people reduce their opioid use or even stop it for the treatment of chronic pain, organic, not the same kind of health ancillary problems. So it's an important tool for the treatment of chronic pain. A lot, Michigan, Ohio, they're like a blue collar working class people. The previous generation spent years on the line, putting cars together, whatever, physical labor. They all have aches and pains, you know what I mean? And it's easy to go to a doctor and get a prescription for, Vicodin or some other opioid. And I've seen over and over again that of all of the conditions, I mean, there's more chronic pain patients than others, but of all the conditions, the chronic pain seems to get the most benefits from cannabis and I'm not saying just hearing it anecdotally, I'm saying that from doctors of the patients that state very clearly they've reduced or completely eliminated opioid, use from their medications. So it's
I would assume from a legal standpoint too, though, you see the crimes being committed by people who are addicted to opioids and the crimes being committed by people who consume cannabis, I feel like is a very different realm. Like that's a whole different ballgame. And I feel like that in itself should speak to the difference.
Exactly. Like as the old saying goes, you'll never hear a police officer say they were called to a domestic violence call and there was two people sitting on the couch smoking a joint. You know what I mean? Or my other favorite one, which is you give a group of guys a case of beer, they'll start a fight. If you give them a bag of cannabis, they'll start a band. So it is, and the use of the opioids, that the doctor gets mad at you, they cut you off, and this is how we've transitioned into this terrible heroin problem that we have. across the country, people dying. You've got the fentanyl mix and all that. It's dangerous, and people should be thinking about other natural, organic ways to treat these symptoms. And, it should be one of the choices that every doctor should probably speak to their patients about. Unfortunately, because they're paid by and driven by Big Pharma remains probably one of the biggest opponents of medical cannabis, in addition to the alcohol industry. But
it's good though that when you're doing, the option for people to continue while on probation is a big thing though, in allowing them to continue their medication and not have to go back to those pharmaceuticals. And that's a very positive thing, including the veteran community. You'd made mention to the veterans and how, the VA just decided to work with them a little bit more. And that's really, really important because many of them have been strung out on pharmaceuticals for a long time and would rather have something a little more holistic.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I think you said it best, that it's the choice. It's allowing the choice to be there for everybody to have the education, to have the accessibility and the choice to make that call, whether they're going to go the route of the traditional pharmaceuticals, or they're going to take cannabis or use cannabis, or are they going to do a combination? Because there's a lot of people that they supplement. They are able to keep their doses of their opioids at a minimum by using cannabis in conjunction. And so I just think I think you said it best by saying, giving them the choice, allowing that to be the possibility that they can have for themselves, I think is the biggest.
It's almost a crime that doesn't happen, especially when you talk about our veterans that are putting their life on the line, fighting for our country. All, if not most of them, suffer from PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
The government, the VA, they don't know how to treat PTSD. I mean, how many suicides happen from people that return from war? Right. Well, cannabis happens to be one of those things. Michigan, PTSD was the first add-on to the list of conditions. Several others have happened since then, which we've been involved in. But the PTSD, the nightmares, the waking up in the middle of the night from the sweats, it has the impact of not having dreams and minimizing those flashbacks and whatnot. So anything to settle those issues should be considered, and not discussing it as a disservice to, these heroes that have, fought for our country and are just looking to return to normalcy. Yeah. And it's problematic, but you're right, the choice in education and part of the regular discussion, and doctors who are thinking about doing this, if any of them are watching, understand they are not prescribing cannabis. That's not the way that the programs have been set up. All the states that allow for medical marijuana put it on the doctor to merely recommend it. The federal courts have addressed this. At one time, in this case out of California, this is the seminal case, the DEA sought to enjoin the physicians that were doing recommendations for medical marijuana. They said, we want to enjoin them from being able to use their DEA license to prescribe medications, take it away because they're getting involved with cannabis. The federal court said they are not prescribing cannabis. They're making a recommendation. They're having a conversation with their patient in a private setting, and this is good. Doctors should be able to say to their patients, this may be your best treatment. I recommend you try this. They're not giving it to them. They're not taking them to the place to get it. They're merely having a verbal conversation. So doctors do not find any liability associated with engaging here. And how difficult could it be to have that conversation and discuss with them how it may work for that particular patient's ailments? And we need more of that. We need people like yourselves who are educating the public and talking to doctors that may want to get involved in it. And our healthcare system is a mess, and we've gone in a terrible direction of the pill, not even addressing the real issues, but just treating and sickness and treating and just continuously. And this is the way they treat it they teach you in medical school. I mean, I've friends, relatives that participate as doctors and whatnot. They don't have enough time to actually try to get to the heal, to fix. It's like, you've got this, then the chart says I give you this. Yeah. Right. And I'm not saying cannabis is the, panacea for all things, or it's going to cure these things, but it might. And the program that a lot of people are on right now, are we know what's going to happen, so it's not a bad idea to educate yourself about it and see what your options are as a patient who's suffering from some debilitating condition.
Agreed. I think that, and real quick, the last education thing I want to throw in here is I think that that's a lot of what people don't understand is like our body, we're born with a system to receive cannabis as medicine, and for it to help balance out our systems working in our bodies, where these synthetic pills that are created in a lab are meant to either hinder our systems or cripple them in some way or rewire, or just they're meant to correct or fix, where cannabis is more meant to help balance and help restore what should have been there in the first place.
That's true.
Homeostasis.
True.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. I kind of don't want it to end, but I know we got to go on. Thanks, guys. I enjoyed this. Have a great day.
Thanks. We'll have you back again sometime.
All right.
Thanks so much for listening to this Canna Conversation. To learn more, please follow us on Instagram at Midwest_Canna Concierge. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen, so other Canna curious folk can find us. We really appreciate your support.